former 2024 presidential candidate. Vivek, welcome back. As always, it was good to see you last night in Washington, D.C. Let me play this a quick sound from Mr. Biden. Quick sound from Mr. Biden. Here it comes, Vivek.
All Americans deserve the freedom to be safe. And America is safer today than when I took office.
So that's my first. In your judgment, is America safer today than it was 3 years ago, Vivek Ramaswamy?
Absolutely not. That's a lie, Larry. And to the contrary, we have 10 million illegals who have entered this country and rising under Biden's regime. That's what I'll call it. That's the largest scale violation of the rule of law that I think we've seen in modern American history. Many of those criminals, the people whose first act of entering this country, if it breaks the law, it actually predicts that they're going to continue to break the law while they're already here. Combine that with what we're seeing in cities across this country, from Chicago to New York, a wave of crime that actually even requires the New York governor to now talk about bringing out the National Guard. Something if President Trump said it, they would dismiss as dictatorial, yet now they recognize as potentially actually necessary, reveals that the State of the Union we saw last night was Orwellian in nature. Say one thing when in fact the opposite is true. And I do think the American people now are attuned to see through that smoke screen. And I think many of them, especially in the cities, Larry, will do just that.
I mean, I would have thought if he was serious about crime, first of all, he has plenty of executive authority. You and I talked about that. He's got 212F and 287G. Both laws stop people from coming in illegally, work with the local police to deport criminals. Okay, he could have used that. Those are laws on the books for years. He didn't. Point number one. Point number two, he's not going to oppose any sanctuary cities. Point number three, he has made no effort to defend cops. This is another thing. Where's the blue line? In all these cities, New York and Chicago and San Francisco and elsewhere, Biden, you know, he never seems to want to defend the blue line, the police, or the firefighters. And his supporters are often on the wrong side of the blue line. I think that goes part and parcel with the fact that we are not safer than we were 3 years ago.
Well, it does. I think 212F and 287G are excellent points, Larry, because these are tools that the chief executive of the country, the U.S. president, already has. Biden tried to make the case last night that they need new laws. We don't need new laws. We need a new president who enforces the laws that are already on the books. 212F basically says the U.S. president has broad authority to set the criteria that other countries have to meet in order to send migrants to this country. The Trump administration used that to say that certain other countries need to have 12 criteria, data points they need to provide. And if they can't provide those data points, then people can't come from those countries. A reasonable step to take. 287G effectively says that the 6,000 ICE agents can use about 1 million local law enforcement to serve their own warrants. These are tools that don't require Congress to act. It requires the president to execute the laws of the United States, which, as a reminder, as if we need it, that's exactly what Article 2 of the Constitution says the U.S. president not only has the authority to do, but has the responsibility to do, to execute the already existent laws of the United States. That's where this president has failed. And so I think it is a myth, and we got to be careful not to fall into this trap. Them saying that the Republicans aren't going to pass some bill for the border. The real problem is if you don't have a president who's enforcing the laws that are already on the books, we have no reason to think that that same president is going to enforce any new laws on the books either. It's another bait and switch. It's another smokescreen. And it's up to us to explain to independent voters why they shouldn't fall for that trick. And if we do a good job of that, Larry, we're going to win. But what we see in that State of the Union last night is they're going to deflect, they're going to lie, they're going to create a false mirage that if we are just complacent in our own right, that's a real risk heading into the rest of this year.
One last one, Vivek, on this point of crime, lawlessness, and, of course, the border collapse. Why not end sanctuary cities? This was a very bad idea to begin with.
Look, I think that there are easy steps we can take. How do you end sanctuary cities? No more federal funding for a city that is actively paying for and sanctioning a breakage of the rule of law. Even if you take New York City, mayors in other cities across this country regretting those decisions that were made. And so one thing we can do on the right is, rather than to point out the fact that they were wrong when they did it, let's actually celebrate when you have even Democratic mayors that would say that that was a mistake. If somebody made a mistake, they're willing to own up to it and turn around and at least correct their behaviors, we should always be the ones to say, you know what, we will always cheer you on as you do it. That creates the incentive structure for more of them to do the same thing. End sanctuary cities, end birthright citizenship for the kids of illegals. It doesn't apply to them. End federal funding for Central America until each of those countries has done their part to blockade their own borders, militarize our own southern border, finish completion of the wall. Our border crisis is solved. This isn't the stuff of rocket science. The country that put a man on the moon can get this much done. This is a challenge of willpower, and that's not going to come from Biden. It's why we need to elect President Trump as the next president. And I think that we have a controlled experiment. We saw with what happened with 4 years under Trump. You laid it out well. We now have 4 years under Biden almost. Compare and contrast. If it comes down to that, this should be a landslide election, and that's what I'm rooting for.
It's great. I love that. You know, Vivek, it's like, let's not make this any harder than it needs to be. There are a series of simple, straightforward steps that can be taken. Anyway, we're out of time. Vivek Ramaswamy, thank you ever so much, as always, for your gracious time. Appreciate it.